You'll transfer $3,000 to the restaurant on Friday. I've already promised, Lydia Caldwell announced to her son's wife, Cassandra, and hung up, leaving a slip of paper with a phone number on the table in front of her. The table fell instantly silent. Penelope stopped scrolling through photos of wedding dresses, and her fiancé, Ethan, slowly lowered his fork. Marcus, Cassandra's husband, sat beside her, staring into his plate, as if this wasn't the first time he'd heard the demand. Cassandra reread the numbers on the paper. There were no bank details, just the name of a Mr. Paul Anderson and an expensive restaurant downtown. She calmly asked what the $3,000 was for. Her mother-in-law was surprised by the very question. According to her, it was merely the deposit for Penelope's wedding reception, which her older sister-in-law was expected to pay. Until that evening, Cassandra had been aware of a completely different plan. Penelope and Ethan had been planning to get married at the county clerk's office and then host about 30 people at a small family-owned cafe. They themselves had estimated a budget of no more than $5,000, including the dress, photographer, and dinner. Cassandra had offered to help with the decorations and give the newlyweds $1,500 as a wedding gift, but she had never agreed to pay for a restaurant, and certainly not a $3,000 deposit. Lydia dismissed the previous conversations with a wave of her hand. She declared that a modest cafe was suitable for a wake, not for her only daughter's wedding. Therefore, she had personally found a worthy venue, discussed the menu, and booked a convenient date before someone else could take it. "Cassie, Mom said you and Marcus decided to gift us the reception," Penelope said tentatively, a look of confusion and awkwardness on her face. She genuinely believed the matter was settled. For weeks, Lydia had been telling her daughter that her brother and his wife wanted to give them a generous family gift, but were keeping it a surprise. She had told Ethan the same thing, adding that Cassandra herself had suggested increasing the number of guests. Now, her future sister-in-law looked at Cassandra with a gratitude that turned refusal into a public humiliation. Cassandra asked Marcus if he knew about this. Her husband finally looked up and said his mother had mentioned a restaurant, but he saw no reason to upset his wife with talk of money right away. "You got a message from your mother and said nothing to me," Cassandra clarified. Marcus replied irritably that this was about his only sister's wedding, not buying some stranger's car. In his view, spouses should help family without long discussions. He reminded her that Cassandra had recently received her annual bonus and was planning to spend it on professional training. The course could be taken later, but Penelope's wedding happened only once. Cassandra felt a cold anger rise within her. Only she, her accountant, and her husband knew the size of her bonus. Marcus hadn't just told his mother about the money, he had allowed her to earmark it in advance. Lydia smiled, noticing her daughter-in-law's reaction, and announced the bonus amount to the entire family. Cassandra worked as a construction cost estimator and had been preparing for 2 years to obtain an advanced certification. It would allow her to move into a major projects division and significantly increase her income. The bonus was just enough to cover the course, the exam, and several months of travel for classes. Marcus had previously supported this plan, but now he spoke as if the course were a whim. He suggested his wife use the $3,000 for the deposit and pay off the remaining cost of the reception over the next 2 months. When Cassandra asked how much the entire celebration would cost, Lydia answered evasively, "A proper wedding is never cheap." She named neither the final sum, the number of guests, nor the terms of the contract. Instead of figures, the mother-in-law began to speak of family duty. According to Lydia, after marrying Marcus, Cassandra had become Penelope's older sister and was obligated to participate in her life. She reminded Cassandra that the young couple had lived in her apartment for several years, using her dishes, furniture, and appliances. Cassandra calmly noted that they had paid the utilities every month, bought their own groceries, and had renovated the kitchen. Her mother-in-law called these trifles that couldn't compare to a mother's care. Then she listed the future guests: second cousins, distant aunts, former colleagues, neighbors, and even her old boss. Penelope was surprised, as she didn't know many of them personally. Lydia explained that a wedding wasn't just for the bride and groom, but also to honor the family. Ethan tried to intervene. He reminded her that his parents were prepared to pay for half of a small reception, but hadn't budgeted for an expensive restaurant. Lydia retorted sharply that the groom's family could save their money for the newlyweds' future apartment. She had already chosen the venue and would not allow anyone to skimp on her daughter. Penelope asked to see photos and the menu. Her mother-in-law said everything would be provided after the deposit was paid. Cassandra immediately spotted the dangerous sequence. First, they demanded a huge sum from her, promising to reveal the terms later. In her line of work, she reviewed contracts daily and knew that such behavior almost always concealed additional obligations. She asked Lydia to show her the contract, the name of the person who signed it, and the exact cost. "The documents are at the restaurant," her mother-in-law replied quickly. "I booked the venue in the family's name." Cassandra clarified who had signed it. Lydia raised her voice and accused her daughter-in-law of trying to ruin the evening. According to her, decent people don't demand a contract from their own mother. It was enough that a Mr. Paul Anderson was expecting payment by Friday. Marcus supported her. He said his wife was professionally jaded and saw a financial trap even in her sister's wedding. He then asked her to just transfer the deposit, and they would sort out the other expenses later. Cassandra asked if he was prepared to contribute the money from his personal savings. Her husband replied that his funds were intended for car repairs and the family's emergency fund. This explanation revealed the true meaning of the word family to her. Marcus's money was a protected reserve. Cassandra's money could be spent without her consent because her husband's mother had already made a promise to a stranger. She looked at Penelope and said calmly that she wasn't backing out of a wedding gift, but she would not pay for a contract she hadn't seen or signed. If the restaurant was truly booked, then whoever made the agreement should produce the documents. Penelope nodded. However, Lydia immediately began to speak louder. She declared that her daughter-in-law was humiliating the bride-to-be out of envy, believing she didn't deserve a nice celebration. Ethan tried to object, but his future mother-in-law cut him off. Marcus pulled Cassandra into the hallway and quietly demanded she not make a scene. He admitted that his mother was indeed counting on her bonus, but asked her to treat it as a family decision that had already been made. If Cassandra refused now, Penelope would think her brother was being cheap about her wedding. The relatives would also gossip about their stinginess. Cassandra asked why she was the one who had to salvage promises made behind her back. Marcus replied that after the wedding, everything would be forgotten, but the family would remember her refusal for years. He suggested they open the banking app that evening and make the transfer immediately, before his wife could get bogged down in paperwork. Cassandra refused. Her husband then said his mother would find a way to convince her anyway. Returning to the table, Cassandra found that Lydia was already on the phone with her sister. The mother-in-law put the call on speaker and, with a sad sigh, explained that Penelope's wedding might be ruined due to her daughter-in-law's greed. She omitted the fact that Cassandra had never promised to pay for the reception. Her aunt, Mildred, immediately declared that the elder daughter-in-law was obligated to support the younger sister. The first call was followed by a second. Lydia was methodically turning her personal decision into Cassandra's public obligation. Marcus didn't stop his mother. He only warned his wife that refusing now would look even worse. Cassandra stood up from the table and grabbed her purse. Before leaving, she once again asked for the contract to be sent to her. Lydia replied that she wouldn't provide any papers until she saw the payment. Then she leaned closer and said in almost a whisper, "When the whole family finds out you promised to pay for the wedding, you'll transfer the money yourself, just to save face." Cassandra walked out into the cold hallway and thought for the first time that her mother-in-law wasn't asking for help. She was creating a situation where someone else's silence was meant to substitute for consent. But Lydia didn't yet understand one thing. Cassandra had worked with contracts her entire life and never paid for promises that didn't bear her signature. "Transfer the money by Friday, or you can stop calling Penelope your sister," came the shrill voice of Aunt Zoe from the phone. Cassandra hadn't even had time for breakfast. One after another, messages from Marcus's relatives appeared on her screen, half of whom she had only seen at weddings and funerals. They called her greedy, heartless, and ungrateful. Lydia's cousin wrote that a decent daughter-in-law would have offered to pay for the reception herself. Uncle Victor sent a 3-minute voice message reminding her that the family had once helped Marcus pay for major car repairs. Cassandra silently put her phone, keys, and documents into her bag. It had taken Lydia one night to turn someone else's money into a family debt. Refusing to pay was now a crime against the entire clan. Marcus stood by the window, hastily buttoning his shirt, pretending not to notice her pale face. Finally, he held out his hand. "Give me your phone. I'll transfer the $3,000 to the restaurant myself, and this will all stop." "From my account? From which other one?" "I don't have that kind of money right now. But you have your savings for the car." Marcus turned sharply from the window. "We've already discussed this. I need the car for work, and your money is just sitting there." Cassandra looked at her husband as if seeing a stranger. Her bonus wasn't just sitting there. For 2 years, she had been selecting a professional certification program that would allow her to become the head of the estimating department. Marcus knew this perfectly well, but now he spoke of her plans as if they were a frivolous purchase. "Show me the contract with the restaurant," she said calmly. "The full amount, the menu, the number of guests, and the signatory's name. After that, we can talk." Mom said the documents are with the manager. "Then have her take a picture of them. Are you deliberately getting hung up on paperwork?" "I'm a cost estimator, Marcus. If someone demands $3,000 from me, I want to know what I'm paying for." He pressed his lips together and grabbed his jacket. Before leaving, Marcus stopped in the doorway and threw out that they would finish the conversation that evening. There was no longer a request in his voice. It sounded like a warning. During her lunch break, Cassandra called Lydia again. Her mother-in-law didn't answer right away and spoke with a pointed coldness, as if doing her a favor. "Send me the contract," Cassandra repeated. "At least the first page and the price list. I am not obligated to report to you about my own daughter's wedding. But I'm obligated to pay for it? You're not paying for me, you're paying for the family's honor. Honor has a menu and a price per person." Lydia took a loud breath. According to her, the restaurant was respectable, the guests were esteemed, and the package was a standard wedding package. She refused to name the final sum. Then she added that the contract was supposedly made in the name of the family, so it didn't matter whose signature was on it. When Cassandra asked for the name of the signatory, her mother-in-law cut the conversation short, declaring she wouldn't let some piece of paper spoil Penelope's celebration. An hour later, Ethan called Cassandra. Normally calm, Penelope's fiancé spoke in clipped sentences, clearly trying to keep his composure. "Cassie, tell me honestly, did you and Marcus promise to pay for the restaurant?" "No. I promised to help decorate the hall and give you two $1,500 after the wedding." "That's what I remember too, but your mother-in-law told Penelope something different." Ethan explained that he and Penelope had planned for a small cafe for 30 people. Their absolute limit was $5,000, including the cake and photographer. But a week ago, Lydia announced she had found a worthy venue, nearly doubled the guest list, and had already invited her former colleagues and distant relatives. She told Penelope not to worry about the cost. Her older brother and his wife were taking care of the reception. "I didn't sign anything," Cassandra said firmly, "and I first heard about the $3,000 yesterday at dinner." "Then we have a big problem," Ethan replied quietly. "Because Penelope's mother has already sent the restaurant's address to everyone." That evening, Lydia was sitting in their kitchen, though no one had invited her. A guest list, written in large script, lay in front of her. Next to it, Marcus had placed a laptop and a calculator. Cassandra took off her coat and immediately understood. They weren't waiting for a conversation, but for a payment to be processed. "Sit down," her mother-in-law commanded. "We've calculated that if you pay the $3,000 now, the rest can be paid 10 days before the wedding." "What rest?" For a second, they both fell silent. "It doesn't matter," Marcus answered first. "Right now, it's just about the deposit. So you know the total cost, but you're not telling me." Lydia tapped a pen irritably on the table, then stated that the numbers were still changing because they needed to order flowers, music, and good alcohol. In her opinion, discussing every little detail with Cassandra was humiliating. All that was required of her was to fulfill the promise that Marcus had supposedly made on behalf of their family. "I did not make such a promise," Cassandra said. "A wife is responsible for her husband's words," her mother-in-law snapped. "Then let the husband be responsible for them with his own money." Marcus slammed the laptop shut so sharply that a spoon on the table jumped. He demanded that Cassandra open her banking app and show him the account balance. According to his calculations, after paying the $3,000, she would still have enough for the first installment on her course, and the rest could be saved up later. Cassandra asked how his mother knew the exact amount of her bonus. Marcus first looked away, then confessed he had told her himself. Lydia wanted to know if the family could handle the restaurant, and Marcus had reassured her that the money would be available soon. So, he hadn't just revealed her private financial information. He had authorized his mother to spend his wife's bonus before even speaking to his wife. Cassandra said nothing. She went into the bedroom, closed the door, and transferred the bonus from their joint savings account to a separate investment account opened only in her name. Then she enabled two-factor authentication for all transactions and changed the password to her banking app. This wasn't revenge. For the first time in her marriage, she was protecting her money from a person who considered access to it a marital right. When Cassandra returned, Marcus was still at the table, and Lydia was on the phone with another relative, loudly complaining that her daughter-in-law was hiding the family budget. Hearing footsteps, the mother-in-law switched to speakerphone so Cassandra could hear the judgmental silence on the other end. "The restaurant will release the booking on Friday," Lydia announced. "And I will tell everyone whose fault it is that Penelope is left without a wedding." "Tell them," Cassandra replied. "But first, show them the contract. You'll regret deciding to humiliate our family with paperwork." Her mother-in-law grabbed the guest list and left, slamming the door. Marcus stayed, but he didn't speak to his wife. That night, he lay on the far edge of the bed and pointedly turned away. Cassandra stared at the ceiling for a long time, remembering his words. Mom wanted to know if the family could handle it. By family, they meant her bank account. By joint decision, they meant an agreement from which she was excluded. And by a gift for Penelope, they meant an obligation assigned without the consent of the one who was supposed to pay. The next morning, the doorbell rang with an insistence that suggested the police were outside. Marcus had already left for work, so Cassandra opened it herself. A courier stood in the hallway with a tablet and a thick envelope adorned with the restaurant's gold logo. "Cassandra Vance? Documents for you regarding a wedding reception. Please sign for receipt." Her name, address, and phone number were indeed printed on the envelope. Through a clear window, the words "Invoice for payment," "Deposit." $3,000 were visible. But at the bottom, barely discernible under a fold in the paper, was a different name. Cassandra closed the door and slowly ran her finger along the edge of the envelope. Lydia had been so afraid to show her the contract that the restaurant had sent it itself. $38,000. Cassandra's voice was so loud that the neighbor's dog started barking next door. She stood in the middle of the foyer, still in her coat, rereading the first page of the contract. The deposit was $3,000, with another $20,000 due 10 days before the wedding. The final payment was due after confirming the alcohol and guest count. The itemized breakdown listed 60 seats, a separate reception area for greeting guests, a live band, a host, a floral arch, imported champagne, and late-night snacks for the wedding party. Even the rental of illuminated letters with the couple's initials cost $1,000. Lydia had called this a standard wedding package, yet the total cost was nearly 8 times Penelope and Ethan's original budget. Cassandra spread the documents out on the kitchen table and began to read them as carefully as she reviewed contractor bids. In the payment contact field, her name was indeed listed, Cassandra Vance. Next to it were her phone number and home address. But the line above held the most important part of the contract, client. There, it read Lydia Caldwell. Below were the last 4 digits of her mother-in-law's credit card number, and on every page was her sprawling signature. Cassandra photographed the documents and zoomed in on the image. There was no power of attorney, third-party consent, or signature from Marcus in the contract. Lydia herself had chosen the services, signed the order, but planned to pay with someone else's money. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Penelope. She entered without her usual smile, dropped her bag on a stool, and asked immediately, "You really didn't know about the restaurant?" Cassandra silently pushed the contract toward her. Penelope saw the total sum and turned pale. Mom said it was around $10,000. "That's only part of the payment. But Ethan and I asked for a small room. Why are there 60 people here?" Penelope quickly flipped through the itemized list. Among the additional services, she found a pre-ceremony cocktail hour, a separate photo zone, and 3 choices of hot entrees. The bride was seeing the list, supposedly compiled for her benefit, for the first time. On the last page was a note. Final guest count may be increased by the client no later than 2 weeks prior to the event. "Not even all of my friends are on this list," Penelope whispered. "But Mom's former coworkers are." Cassandra didn't blame her. It was obvious that Lydia had deceived more than just her daughter-in-law. To Penelope, she had promised a lavish wedding paid for by her brother. To Marcus, she had suggested his wife would easily part with her bonus. And to relatives, she had reported that Cassandra had already given her word. Everyone got a separate version, convenient for pressuring the next person. Penelope tried to call her mother several times, but she declined the calls and then sent a text. "Don't listen to jealous people before your wedding." That phrase finally pushed Ethan over the edge. Penelope called her fiancé and, before she could explain anything, burst into tears. Ethan asked her to stay at Cassandra's until he arrived. "First, I'm going to talk to the restaurant," Cassandra said. "I need to understand why the invoice was sent to me." She dialed the number from the letterhead. The administrator who answered checked the contract number and connected her with the manager. Paul Anderson spoke calmly and politely, but grew wary after the first few questions. "I'm sorry, You are Cassandra Vance? He asked again. Lydia Caldwell told us you were handling all the payments. I saw the contract for the first time 10 minutes ago. There was a pause on the line. We were told that the bride's mother was booking the banquet, and the eldest son and his wife were paying for it. Do you see my signature on the contract? No. The client listed is Lydia Caldwell. Penelope stopped crying and moved closer to the phone. Cassandra put it on speaker, placed it on the table, and asked the manager to describe how the order was processed. Mr. Anderson remembered Lydia Caldwell immediately. She had come to the restaurant twice, spent a long time inspecting both halls, and rejected the cheaper option because the staircase wasn't grand enough for greeting guests. During her second visit, she chose the most expensive package and demanded they add a live band. When the event coordinator asked who would be making the payments, Lydia wrote down Cassandra's number and confidently stated that her daughter-in-law was in charge of the family budget. According to her, Cassandra was too busy with work to come in person but had fully approved the expenses. The mother-in-law even joked that young women like to feign independence, but the elders still make the big decisions for them. Why did you send the documents to my address? Cassandra asked. Because we couldn't get in touch with the payment contact. We called you twice yesterday, but the calls were immediately dropped. Cassandra checked her blocked numbers list and saw the restaurant's phone number. She certainly hadn't blocked it, but Marcus knew the unlock code for her smartphone and had been alone with it in the kitchen that morning while she was in the shower. The realization was colder than the sum on the invoice. She couldn't yet prove who had blacklisted the number, but the coincidence looked far too convenient. The restaurant couldn't reach the supposed payer, so they sent the papers by courier. Lydia had probably expected them to demand the deposit at the last minute, when there would be no time left to argue. I request that you send me an electronic copy of the contract with all its addenda, Cassandra said, and everything related to the service agreements with the client. Mr. Anderson replied that he could only send materials pertaining to the order and her contact information. A few minutes later, an archive arrived in her email: the contract, menu, payment schedule, and a printout of the administrator's correspondence with Lydia Caldwell. Penelope read the messages over Cassandra's shoulder. Her mother-in-law hadn't been negotiating for a lower price, but for a complimentary champagne toast. She had demanded they replace the domestic sparkling wine with imported champagne and add another 10 seats in case important guests show up. When the administrator warned of the increasing cost, Lydia would reply, "Write it down. My daughter-in-law earns well. It's not a problem for her." The last message had been sent just 2 days ago. The manager was reminding her that the deposit had to be paid by Friday, otherwise the reservation might be given to other clients. Lydia wrote back, "Don't worry. If Cassandra starts to argue, the family will convince her. She's afraid of looking greedy." Penelope covered her mouth with her hand. At that moment, a key turned in the lock, and Marcus walked into the apartment. Seeing his wife, his sister, and the papers spread out, he froze, but almost immediately tried to regain his composure. "Why did you launch an investigation?" he asked. Mom wanted to do something beautiful for Penelope. "For $38,000, Cassandra replied, "of which you're demanding $3,000 now, and we're planning to demand the rest later." Marcus looked at the contract, then at his tear-stained sister. He clearly hadn't known the full amount, but instead of surprise, he chose irritation. "We could have discussed this calmly. We are discussing it. Tell Penelope, when did I promise to pay for the reception?" Her husband didn't answer. His silence was more honest than all of Lydia's words. Cassandra's phone vibrated again. Paul Anderson had sent another file, a photo of a page from the booking log where clients personally confirmed their chosen package. Below Lydia Caldwell's signature was a short note: "Payment via Cassandra Vance's card." Next to it, in a different handwriting, a restaurant employee had noted, "Payer's consent not provided." Cassandra turned the screen toward Marcus. "Now, tell me why your mother was so sure I would pay." He looked down, and Penelope understood for the first time that her brother hadn't been silent because he knew nothing. He had been silent because he too had been counting on breaking his wife at the last minute. "Get rid of that paper before I rip it up in front of your face." Lydia burst into the apartment and reached for the contract. Cassandra managed to cover the documents with her hand. Her mother-in-law had arrived 20 minutes after Marcus's call and hadn't even taken off her boots. She stormed into the kitchen as if she could reclaim her power with a loud voice alone. Marcus stood by the wall, sullen and confused. Penelope was in the bedroom. After talking to Ethan, her head had started to ache, and she had asked to be left alone. Lydia didn't know her daughter was still in the apartment. She was sure that she was now facing only her weak son and a daughter-in-law who could be intimidated by the threat of family shame. "Why did you list me as the payer?" Cassandra asked. "Because you're supposed to pay. I didn't sign anything. A signature is a formality. In a family, a verbal agreement is enough." Cassandra discreetly touched the screen of her phone, which lay next to the sugar bowl. The voice recorder was already on. Before her mother-in-law arrived, she had told Marcus she was willing to discuss the deposit one more time if she heard the truth about the order. Her husband had immediately called his mother. Cassandra knew Lydia wouldn't come to apologize, but to apply pressure. That was why she had moved Penelope out of sight and left the contract on the table. Her mother-in-law had to believe her old tactics had almost worked. Cassandra had even opened her banking app, but she placed the phone face down so as not to reveal that the money had already been moved to a protected account. "Let's say I pay the deposit," she said. "But first, explain why the guest count grew to 60. Lydia's face immediately softened. She thought she had won. "See? You can be reasonable. 30 people isn't a wedding, it's a wake. I added relatives, former colleagues, and a few respectable people. They'll be useful to Penelope later." Did Penelope ask for a live band? Penelope is still a child. She doesn't understand what a proper celebration should look like. And the imported champagne? You can't serve guests cheap booze. You work for a construction company. You should know that reputation costs money. Lydia sat down at the table and pulled the contract toward her, this time without trying to tear it. She began to explain that she had made the most expensive decisions consciously. The restaurant's staircase was perfect for photos. A private room allowed them to avoid mixing our people with the general public. And the floral arch was meant to show Ethan's family that the bride didn't come from a poor home. When Cassandra asked why the engaged couple knew nothing about the expenses, her mother-in-law smirked. The young, in her opinion, were supposed to be happy, not count money. Those with the means should pay. And since Cassandra had a bonus, Lydia had decided the matter was closed. "But I didn't agree," Cassandra reminded her. "You would have refused if we had asked beforehand. So you signed everything without me." "Exactly. Sometimes you have to present a person with a done deal to make them stop thinking only of themselves." Marcus paced nervously around the kitchen. He tried to stop his mother with a look, but Lydia was already savoring her own explanation. She recounted how she had specifically given Cassandra's number as the payment contact. The restaurant was supposed to call her and remind her of the deadline. If the manager had informed her that the booking was about to be lost, her daughter-in-law, according to Lydia's calculation, would have been terrified of being blamed for a ruined wedding. She had warned the relatives in advance for the same reason. The more people who knew about the gift, the harder it would be for Cassandra to refuse. This wasn't an improvisation or a misunderstanding. It was a carefully constructed trap where human shame was meant to replace voluntary consent. "And what if I had other plans for my bonus?" Cassandra asked. "Your courses can wait. Penelope is only getting married once." "How did you know the exact amount?" Lydia nodded toward her son. "Marcus told me. He's your husband, not a stranger." "And he gave you permission to spend my money?" "He said you would be stubborn at first, but then you'd give in. You always give in when you don't want to fight." Marcus stopped abruptly. "Mom, that's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said," she retorted. "You said, 'Go ahead and sign. Cassandra will make some noise and then pay.' What are you playing the saint for now?" Penelope appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was standing barefoot, clutching a folded blanket to her chest. Lydia saw her daughter and, for the first time in the entire conversation, lost her confidence. Her mouth opened, but no explanation came. Penelope had heard enough. Her mother considered her a child, had ignored her wishes, and had turned her wedding into a spectacle for her own acquaintances. Even more painful was something else. Her brother had participated in the deception. He knew Cassandra hadn't consented, and still promised his mother that the pressure would work. "So there was no gift?" Penelope asked quietly. "You just decided to take her bonus." "Don't be ridiculous," Lydia answered quickly. "Everything was done for you. For me, there would have been 30 guests, a cafe near the park, and music from our playlist. That's what Ethan and I chose. You'll thank me for this later. For a debt of almost $40,000? Her mother-in-law jumped up and accused Cassandra of deliberately turning her daughter against her. Penelope replied that no one had turned her against anyone. She had heard the confession with her own ears. Marcus tried to take his sister's hand, but she stepped back. His complicity hurt her no less than their mother's. For years, he had said he was protecting the family. Now, it turned out that by protection, he meant his wife's silent agreement to pay for his mother's decisions. Cassandra stopped the recording and turned the phone screen up. Since we're discussing a family agreement, it's best to preserve its exact terms. Lydia turned pale. You were recording me? I was recording a conversation I was part of, so that tomorrow no one can say I misunderstood your words. Delete it immediately. No. Her mother-in-law lunged for the phone, but Penelope stepped between her and the table. The movement was almost imperceptible, but for the first time, it established a boundary. Lydia stopped as if her daughter had struck her. She was used to Penelope crying, arguing, and then apologizing 5 minutes later. But now, she was silently protecting the woman her mother had tried to make the villain. Late that evening, after Lydia had left, Marcus confessed to his wife that he had known about the deposit a week ago. He hadn't seen the contract and had no idea of the final sum, but he had gone along with his mother's plan. It seemed to him that Cassandra would sacrifice her courses if Penelope started to worry and relatives began to judge. He himself had no intention of giving up his savings because he considered them their joint safety net. He didn't call his wife's bonus joint money until his mother needed it. Cassandra listened without tears. Each of her husband's answers didn't excuse him, but only showed how accustomed he had become to her compliance. Tomorrow I'm meeting with Paul Anderson, she said. I want to know what happens if the deposit isn't paid. So you're still refusing to pay? I never agreed to. At that moment, Penelope received a text from her mother. If the restaurant demanded a penalty, Cassandra would pay it. She had caused this disgrace. But now, Cassandra had the contract, the correspondence, and a recording where Lydia herself explained the entire scheme. Her mother-in-law still hoped to assign blame. She just didn't understand one thing. This time, every one of her words had already become evidence. If the reception is canceled, the client will be the one to pay, which is Lydia Caldwell. Paul Anderson turned the contract toward Cassandra. Not you. They were sitting in a small office at the restaurant. Next to Cassandra were Penelope and Ethan. Across from them were the manager and Marina, the administrator who had processed the order. A thick folder with addenda, invoices, and the printed correspondence lay on the table. Paul Anderson explained that the $3,000 had not yet been received, so the main reservation wasn't considered fully paid. However, the restaurant had already turned down another couple for that date, prepared a custom menu, and begun coordinating with musicians and florists. If the order were canceled, Lydia Caldwell would have to compensate for confirmed expenses and a fee for holding the date. The preliminary amount was $2,500. So the wedding won't be ruined because of Cassandra? Penelope asked. The decision rests with the person who signed the contract, the manager replied. Or you and your fiancé can choose a different option. Ethan demanded to see the initial request. Marina produced a sheet filled out during Lydia's first visit. It listed 40 guests and a package costing $12,000. Even that exceeded the couple's budget, but 2 days later, the mother-in-law had returned and expanded the order. She added 20 people, changed the menu, ordered a separate cocktail hour, and demanded a live band instead of a DJ. Every change was confirmed by her signature. Penelope silently flipped through the pages, finding new details. White rose centerpieces, gold chair covers, a special table for honored guests, an expensive suite for the newlyweds. She hadn't chosen a single one of these services. And what's this? Ethan pointed to the line-item outdoor ceremony. The client wanted to hold the ceremony on the summer terrace, Marina explained. In February, the administrator looked embarrassed. Lydia had intended to use the terrace only for photos, but she still demanded they set up an arch and heaters to make the pictures look like they were from a European wedding. When told the price, she didn't haggle. A message appeared in the correspondence. Add it. My daughter-in-law has money, she'll pay when it's all decided. The next phrase was even more revealing. The main thing is to present her with a done deal. If she finds out the total sum beforehand, she'll start acting like she's in charge of the budget. Cassandra read it twice. Her mother-in-law considered her frugality a flaw, but it was precisely with that frugality that she intended to display her own wealth to others. Paul Anderson admitted that his staff should have become suspicious earlier. Technically, Lydia was the client, so the restaurant accepted her instructions. However, the promise of payment via a third party's card created a problem. The manager offered 2 options. Either the signatory pays the deposit herself, or the order is reissued to Penelope and Ethan with a new budget and a reduced package. The restaurant had no legal basis to transfer the debt to Cassandra. Her phone number was listed for contact purposes only, and did not make her a party to the contract. Penelope asked them not to change anything until after a family discussion. She wanted her mother to hear the terms for the first time, not from a daughter she was used to interrupting, but from the person whose signature was on every service. After the meeting, they went to a small coffee shop across from the restaurant. Penelope sat by the window, looking at the entrance adorned with gold lights. Just a week ago, she had imagined herself walking out of there in a wedding dress. Now, the luxurious facade reminded her of a set built on someone else's humiliation. "I believed, Mom," she told Cassandra. "I was even offended when you refused to pay. I thought you had changed your mind after making a promise. She did everything to make you think that. And what if the courier hadn't brought the contract?" Cassandra didn't answer. They all knew what would have happened. Under threats, tears, and accusations, she might have paid the deposit, only to find out about the remaining $35,000 a few weeks later. Then Lydia would have said it was too late to back out. Ethan suggested they return to their original plan: a small cafe, 30 guests, a simple menu, and music without a host. He had $4,000 saved. Penelope could add $1,500, and Ethan's father had promised to contribute as well. They didn't need someone else's bonus. His mother just hadn't allowed them to see the real numbers. Penelope smiled for the first time hearing this. She wanted a wedding where she knew the names of all the guests, not an expensive spectacle for people in front of whom Lydia was trying to appear more influential. But there was still the cancellation fee. According to the contract, her mother had to pay the $2,500, and Penelope doubted she would accept responsibility without another fight. The fight started sooner than they expected. Lydia was waiting for Penelope near her apartment building. She stood by the entrance in an unbuttoned fur coat, holding her phone with the family group chat open. "You went to the restaurant behind my back," she shouted. "It's my wedding. After everything I've done for you, you chose that woman's side. That woman didn't sign your contract." The mother-in-law declared that the signature didn't matter because the expenses were a family matter anyway. Penelope showed her a photo of the message. "My daughter-in-law has money. She'll pay when it's all decided." Lydia snatched the phone from her daughter's hands, but Ethan immediately took it back. A few neighbors stopped near the entrance, pretending to look for their keys. The mother-in-law noticed them and instantly lowered her voice. She wasn't afraid of the harm she had caused, but of the witnesses. "You stole my private correspondence," she hissed at Cassandra. "The restaurant provided materials related to the order, which listed my personal information. I'll file a complaint against you. First, pay the $2,500 cancellation fee." Lydia turned pale, then declared she wouldn't allow anything to be canceled. In her view, her daughter had simply fallen under the influence of her fiancé and sister-in-law. She had already invited relatives, ordered a new dress, and told her former colleagues about the luxurious restaurant. To cancel the reception meant admitting she didn't have the money. The mother-in-law demanded that Penelope return home and stop embarrassing her. But for the first time, Penelope refused. She said she would stay at Ethan's and wouldn't discuss the wedding without him. That same evening, the family chat filled with a new stream of messages. Lydia wrote that Cassandra had tricked the restaurant into sending her a bill and had turned Penelope against her own mother. Aunt Zoe suggested they all get together and put the daughter-in-law in her place. Marcus supported the meeting, hoping to end the conflict, but Cassandra immediately understood her mother-in-law was preparing another public trial. A family dinner was scheduled for Sunday at Lydia's apartment. She invited Aunt Zoe, Uncle Victor, 2 cousins, Penelope and Ethan, and even the groom's parents. "You don't have to go," Marcus told his wife. "Oh, I'm going. Especially if your mother is going to be allowed to speak for me again." Cassandra printed out the contract, the addendums, and the correspondence in several copies. Separately, she saved the recording of the confession and Paul Anderson's number. Meanwhile, Lydia sent a final message to the relatives. On Sunday, Cassandra will confirm in front of everyone that she will pay for the wedding. Her mother-in-law had once again announced the decision before the conversation, but this time, the voice at the table would not be her version of events, but that of the person holding the original contract. "Either you apologize to me right now and transfer the $3,000, or you're out of this family." Lydia slammed her palm on the table. The sharp sound made the glasses tremble and the plates clink. 14 people were gathered in the small living room. Aunt Zoe sat next to her mother-in-law, ready to support her every word. Uncle Victor sighed heavily, as if already disappointed in Cassandra. Marcus's cousins held their phones in their laps, occasionally glancing at the screens. Penelope and Ethan were near the window with the groom's parents. Marcus sat between his mother and his wife, but he had placed his chair slightly closer to Cassandra. It was his first attempt to show he wasn't entirely on his mother's side. However, after everything that had happened, a few inches weren't enough. First, Explain to us why you're refusing to help Penelope without all your paperwork tricks, Aunt Zoe demanded. The paperwork is what will explain everything, Cassandra replied. She took copies of the contract from her folder and handed them to the guests. The room immediately grew quiet. Lydia tried to forbid the relatives from reading, claiming the documents contained private information, but Uncle Victor had already reached the final sum. His face fell. $38,000? He asked. Lydia, you said the restaurant was around $10,000. The price changed because of additional services. What additional services? Cassandra placed a list on the table. 60 guests, a live band, expensive alcohol, a floral arch, and a private room. Aunt Zoe found her own name among the invitees and stopped being the first to object. Lydia quickly went on the offensive. She said she had chosen all the services for her daughter's sake, and the final sum could still be reduced. Cassandra was supposedly deliberately scaring people with numbers to make her mother-in-law look extravagant. Then she repeated her main point. Marcus and his wife had promised to pay for the reception. Marcus tensed but didn't object. Then Penelope took out her phone and read her mother's message to the restaurant aloud. Add it. My daughter-in-law has money. She'll pay when it's all decided. The relatives began to whisper. Lydia accused her daughter of betrayal and demanded she stop the public humiliation of her mother. You publicly called Cassandra greedy, Ethan reminded her. So you'll hear the truth publicly too. What truth? The mother-in-law shouted. Her name is on the invoice. Let's clarify what that means, Cassandra said. She dialed Paul Anderson. The manager had agreed in advance to answer questions related to the contract. Cassandra put the call on speaker and placed the phone in the center of the table. Hearing the restaurant's name, Lydia reached for the device, but Penelope stopped her hand. Mr. Anderson, Cassandra began, the family members are gathered here. Could you please tell us who entered into the contract for the wedding reception and who is obligated to resolve the issue of payment or cancellation? The manager's voice came through clearly. The client and signatory is Lydia Caldwell, not her daughter-in-law. Cassandra Vance's number is listed only as a contact and does not transfer any payment obligation to her. The silence after these words was almost physical. Even Aunt Zoe looked down. Lydia still tried to argue. She claimed the restaurant staff had been told about a family agreement and accepted the order knowing Cassandra would pay. Paul Anderson confirmed that the mother-in-law had indeed said this, but had not provided Cassandra's written consent. Moreover, a note to that effect had been made in the booking log. If the reception were to be cancelled, the bill for actual costs incurred would go to the person whose signature was on the contract. The preliminary amount was $2,500. Lydia asked if the bill could be sent to Marcus, but the manager repeated that he would only discuss changes with the client or a new signatory. Thank you, Cassandra said, and ended the call. You colluded with him to say that, her mother-in-law screamed. You have the original contract, Ethan's father noted. Your signature is on it. Cassandra played the recording from the kitchen. The relatives heard Lydia's voice. Sometimes you have to present a person with a done deal. Then came the explanation of why Cassandra's number was on the invoice, and why the family had been turned against her beforehand. Aunt Zoe slowly edged her chair away from her sister. Uncle Victor asked to turn off the recording, not out of pity for Lydia, but because he was embarrassed by his own accusations. One of the cousins quietly admitted that she too had called Cassandra at the hostess's request. The relatives began to realize they had been used as tools of pressure. Their outrage wasn't in defense of Penelope, but part of a prearranged plan. Marcus finally spoke. He turned to his mother and asked why she had increased the cost to almost $40,000 when she knew his wife hadn't agreed. His voice held the anger and hurt of a man who only now understood that he could be the next one to be blamed. You said it was $10,000 at most. And you said Cassandra got a big bonus, Lydia shot back instantly. You yourself told me to sign. You said she's afraid of drama and would give in once the whole family knew. Marcus turned pale. I didn't tell you to pick the most expensive package. But you liked the plan just fine when your wife was the one supposed to pay. Lydia delivered this with cruel precision. The table fell silent again, this time with the silence directed at Marcus. Cassandra asked her husband if he had blocked the restaurant's number on her phone. Marcus was silent for a long time, then confessed. The morning after the family dinner, his mother had sent him the number and asked him to take care of the calls for a couple of days. She was afraid the staff would tell Cassandra the full amount too early. Marcus had done it, convincing himself he was preventing an unnecessary fight. Cassandra listened without surprise. He hadn't just remained silent. He had helped conceal information and then demanded she open her banking app. Even Lydia now looked at her son with irritated recognition. His admission had destroyed the last possibility of calling it all a misunderstanding. Penelope stood up and took her mother's guest list from the table. The wedding will be somewhere else, and only for those Ethan and I choose. You are not to call the restaurant or book music or invite anyone on our behalf. I am your mother, so I will invite you, as my mother. But you will not run my wedding anymore. Penelope tore the list in half, not demonstratively, not with anger, but simply separating her life from someone else's script. Lydia covered her face with her hands, expecting relatives to comfort her, but no one rose from their seat. Ethan's parents were discussing a small cafe with their son. Uncle Victor was studying the contract, and Aunt Zoe was hastily deleting her own insulting messages from the family chat. Cassandra gathered her papers and headed for the exit. Marcus caught up with her in the foyer. Wait, we can fix this. The wedding, maybe, she replied. But this isn't about the wedding anymore. Behind the door, a muffled argument continued, while in front of Cassandra lay an empty hallway. Her mother-in-law had lost the right to manage her daughter's celebration. Marcus, however, was just beginning to understand that along with $3,000, he had almost lost his own wife. I'm not leaving because of the $3,000, Marcus. I'm leaving because you helped take away my right to say no. Cassandra zipped her suitcase and placed it by the door. She hadn't packed up the whole apartment, just her work things, documents, laptop, and clothes for a few weeks. She could stay with a colleague for the first few days, then planned to rent a small studio near her office. Marcus stood in the middle of the bedroom, not trying to hold her back. After the family dinner, it was as if he had lost the right to even that gesture. He repeated again that he hadn't understood the scale of his mother's order. But Cassandra reminded him, betrayal didn't require knowing the final sum. It was enough to block the restaurant's number, give away the size of her bonus, and count on the fear of a scandal to make his wife pay. Marcus asked if she was planning to file for divorce. Cassandra answered honestly that she didn't know yet. She needed time to figure out if their marriage had ever existed separately from Lydia's decisions. She laid out 3 conditions, without which a return wasn't even up for discussion. Their salary accounts would remain separate, joint expenses would be fixed in advance, and Cassandra's financial information would no longer be shared with relatives. Lydia would not get a key to their apartment and would not be involved in the couple's decisions. The 3rd condition was the hardest. Marcus had to stop calling it peace when his wife was silent and his mother got what she wanted. I agree, he said quickly. You agree now because you're afraid of being alone. I need to see what you'll do when Mom starts pushing again. Cassandra took her suitcase and closed the door behind her. The next day, the restaurant sent Lydia a notice to either confirm the order or process a cancellation. She didn't respond for 3 days, hoping Penelope would get scared and ask to keep the reception. But her daughter and Ethan had already signed a new contract with a small cafe near an old park. The hall held 32 people, the menu was reasonably priced, and the owners allowed the couple to bring their own decorations. Instead of a live band, Ethan arranged for a friend to DJ. Penelope skipped the floral arch and decided to spend part of the money on a good photographer. For the first time, preparing for the wedding brought her joy, not the feeling that she was playing the lead role in her mother's celebration. Lydia found out about the new cafe from the group chat. She immediately called her daughter and announced she wouldn't set foot in a cheap cafeteria with plastic chairs. Penelope calmly replied that the invitation remained open, but no one would beg her to come. Then, the mother-in-law tried to shift the $2,500 cancellation fee onto Marcus. For the first time, her son refused without a lengthy explanation. He reminded his mother that he had warned her not to expand the order, though he knew full well that this statement didn't absolve him of his own guilt toward his wife. Lydia threatened to tell the relatives that her children had abandoned her with a debt. Marcus replied that everyone she planned to complain to had already seen the contract and heard the recording. A week later, the restaurant sent the final invoice. After removing services that hadn't yet been ordered, the compensation amount was reduced to $2,200. It included holding the date, menu preparation, and payment for the decorator's work on the custom project. Lydia went to the restaurant in the very same new dress she had bought for the event and argued with Paul Anderson for nearly an hour. But her signatures were on the addenda, and the list of completed work was confirmed by documents. In the end, she paid from her savings. It didn't bankrupt her, but for the first time, it forced her to personally cover the cost of a decision made for the sake of others' admiration. The hardest part wasn't the payment, but having to sign off on the cancellation of her own lavish vision. Meanwhile, Cassandra paid for her certification program. When the enrollment confirmation arrived in her email, she stared at the screen for a long time and felt not triumph, but relief. The bonus that everyone had been managing without her was once again part of her future. She rented a bright studio 15 minutes from work, bought a simple desk, and set her laptop by the window. In the evenings, Cassandra studied, and Marcus visited only by prior arrangement. He didn't ask her to come back immediately. For the first time in their marriage, her husband had to prove his seriousness not with promises, but with repeated actions. He changed the lock on their apartment and didn't give his mother a new key. He then created a spreadsheet for household expenses and transferred Cassandra half the money for the months she had paid more than him. The most painful step was the conversation with Lydia. Marcus told her he would no longer be a mediator between her desires and his wife's money. If his mother told relatives another lie about Cassandra, he would personally publish the documents and the recording. Lydia called her son ungrateful and didn't answer his calls for 2 weeks. Previously, Marcus would have immediately gone to apologize. Now, he endured the silence and understood for the first time that his mother's hurt feelings were not a catastrophe, but a way to regain control. Penelope and Ethan's wedding took place 2 months later. The cafe had wooden chairs, simple white tablecloths, and small bouquets on the tables. No one greeted guests on a grand staircase, but the newlyweds knew every single person in the room. Lydia did come. She wore a severe navy blue dress and barely spoke to Cassandra. The relatives were also more cautious. Aunt Zoe apologized for her phone call and admitted she had believed one side without asking a single question. Uncle Victor gave the couple an envelope and joked that he now checks a contract even before ordering food delivery. The laughter was awkward, but for the first time, it wasn't directed at Cassandra. During the toasts, Penelope took the microphone. She thanked Ethan's parents, their friends, and her brother, then turned to Cassandra. This wedding could have started with someone else's debt and a big family lie. Cassandra, she said aloud, showed us that a gift cannot be demanded, and love is not measured by the price of a restaurant. Thanks to her, today is truly our celebration. Lydia looked down. Penelope didn't call her mother a liar, didn't show the correspondence, and didn't humiliate her in front of the guests. But everyone at the tables knew the story of the canceled reception. The mother-in-law had lost face not because she couldn't afford a lavish wedding, but because she had tried to buy respect with someone else's money. After the celebration, Marcus walked Cassandra to her taxi. They stood under a wet snow, and he asked if their marriage had a chance. Cassandra replied that a chance had only just appeared, now that he had stopped demanding immediate forgiveness. She wasn't ready to return yet, but she agreed to continue the conversation. Marcus nodded. For a man accustomed to resolving family conflicts with a single word, yield-waiting became his first real lesson in responsibility. Lydia caught up with them at the car. She told Cassandra that the whole scandal could have been avoided if her daughter-in-law had simply helped the family. Her voice no longer held its former confidence, but she still couldn't admit her guilt. Cassandra opened the taxi door and looked at her calmly. You can write my phone number on an invoice, but you can't write my name in place of your own signature. She got into the car, taking with her the bonus, the education, and the right to manage her own life. Behind her remained a family that had been forced to understand a simple truth. Someone else's consent cannot be forged, not even for the most beautiful celebration.